The Boer War is viewed as a white man's war in a black man's country, as it was fought between the new colonial power of Britain and the descendants of European colonists in South Africa. The war devastated the region, and in the aftermath, it was revealed that Britain used some horrific tactics that affected both the fighting men and the civilians in the area. But how much do you know about this famous war? Stay tuned as we take a look at 10 interesting facts about the Boer War. Number 1. There were two Boer Wars. The First Boer War, also known as the First Anglo-Boer War or the Transvaal War, was a colonial conflict between the British, who had acquired the Cape Colony in South Africa after the Napoleonic Wars, and the Boers, a group of farmers descended from Dutch, German, and French Huguenot settlers. Boer was derived from the Afrikaans word for farmer, and the conflict had arisen due to tensions between the British colonizers and the Transvaal Republic, who wanted independence for the Boers. The British Secretary of State for the colonies wanted to form a confederation of all the South African factions under British control, including independent Boer republics and African groups. In 1877, the British annexed the Transvaal with the support of the President of the Transvaal Republic, despite objections from the Boer population. The Boers tried non-violent ways to help them regain their independence, but by October of 1880, it was declared that passive resistance is now becoming futile. The first open conflict between the British and the Boers broke out that December. By March 1881, the two factions had entered peace negotiations, although by 1884 they still had not reached a satisfactory conclusion. The primary source of antagonism was that the British wanted to retain some control over the otherwise independent newly formed South African Republic. These tensions, among other issues, led to the Second Boer War. The Second Boer War, also known as the South African War, was fought between the British Empire and two Boer republics, the South African Republic and the Orange Free State. This war was much more brutal and costly than the previous one and paved the way for the widespread use of modern weapons, such as breech-loading rifles and machine guns that would become characteristic of the First World War. The South African War resulted in a British victory, and South Africa was regarded as a British colony until 1961. Number 2. The British portrayed it as a gentleman's war. A gentleman's war was generally classified as a conflict in which both sides abided by the rules of combat and had mutual respect for each other. Although the British publicized the war as necessary and gentlemanly, their tactics became less than chivalrous as they failed to secure a swift victory. These underhanded tactics included a scorched earth approach that Lord Kitchener adopted to prevent the Boers from acquiring resources. The British also set up refugee camps as a kindness, but these camps were far from the sanctuaries they were purported to be. Number 3. The British used concentration camps. Yep, that's right. It wasn't long before these refugee camps turned into something far more insidious: concentration camps. After Kitchener's scorched earth approach, many South African families had been forcibly displaced, and the British military removed them in order to house them in the ill-equipped British camps. Around 40 camps were constructed, although they were completed hastily and without much thought to the accommodation of a large number of displaced women and children. The rationing system was biased, with families being given less food if their husbands, brothers, or sons were fighting against the British. Soon, the unsanitary conditions and overcrowding led to outbreaks of dysentery, typhoid, and malaria. Between 18,000 and 28,000 South Africans died in the camps, with roughly 80% of that number children. The horrors of the camps were exposed in 1901 when social reformer Emily Hobhouse visited the camps and quickly exposed the conditions of the families living there. Increasing public pressure from the British eventually forced the British military in South Africa to improve the living conditions. By the end of 1901, the military had adopted a new tactic of leaving displaced families to fend for themselves, hoping that the increased pressure of keeping their families safe would force the Boers to abandon their guerrilla campaign. Number 4. Van Gogh's younger brother died during the conflict. Cornelius van Gogh is often referred to as the unknown Gogh, since little is known about his life. Born in the Netherlands, he moved to the UK as a young man, but after 2 miserable years working as a metalworker in Lincoln, he emigrated to South Africa. Cornelius fought for the Boers against the British when the Second Boer War broke out, but was wounded and captured at the Battle of Elandslaagte before being taken to a prisoner of war camp in March 1900. In April, he died, but the details of his death are disputed. According to his death certificate, he fell ill and accidentally shot himself while gripped by a fever, although many believe he committed suicide, much like his more famous older sibling. Number 5. It was the start of the legend of the unkillable soldier. The real person behind the legend of the unkillable soldier was British soldier Sir Adrian Carton de Wart. This one-eyed, one-handed war veteran survived 3 major conflicts spanning 6 decades and managed to walk away from plane crashes and prisoner of war camps. His military career began in 1899. 20-year-old Carton de Wart, the educated son of an aristocratic Belgian family, falsified his name and age in order to join the British Army and head for South Africa. He abandoned his studies at Balliol College in Oxford and enlisted as 25-year-old Trooper Carton before being deployed to South Africa. Early on, he was wounded in the stomach and groin and was sent home, but this didn't deter him. He became obsessed with physical fitness, running, playing sports, and hiking. In 1901, he returned to South Africa and became a second lieutenant in the 4th Dragoon Guards. De Wart would go on to serve in World Wars I and II, during which he was shot in the face, causing him to lose his left eye. He also lost a hand and was shot through the skull, hip, leg, ankle, and ear. He was given a glass eye, but he found the thing so uncomfortable that he threw it out of a taxi window and took to wearing a black eye patch. He ended his career at the age of 66 with one eye, one hand, and the honorary title of Lieutenant General. He died in 1963 at the age of 83. Number 6. The cause of the South African War is still debated. According to the British, the Second Boer War was necessary to defend their suzerainty over South Africa. After the First Boer War, it was decided but not agreed that the British would retain the right to partially control South Africa, although the Boers would be largely independent. However, many historians argued that the real reason was gold. In 1886, gold was found in the plateau of Witwatersrand, which was under the jurisdiction of the Transvaal government. The scale of the gold deposits prompted a gold rush, and people came from across the globe to seek their fortune. The Witwatersrand gold mining industry was beyond British control, allowing the South African Republic to modernize and compete with Britain for the rule of South Africa. Around 1897, the British tried to undermine the political independence of the South African Republic by demanding that the British gold miners and settlers, dubbed Uitlanders by the Afrikaans, should be granted political rights, meaning that they would have a dominant role in the formation of state policy. The reticence of the Boers to grant this concession was painted as a threat to the dominance of the British in South Africa and used to justify sending more British troops to the area. In 1899, the Boer declared that if the British troops were not removed, the Boer republics would go to war with the British. Number 7. The participation and deaths of black South Africans were suppressed. Although the Boer War is generally referred to as a white man's war, plenty of black South Africans fought and died due to the conflict, with between 15,000 and 30,000 black Africans serving the British as scouts and sentries. The Boer War was fought in a region where the majority of the population was black, and the Boers were not exactly popular with the African tribes. Their large and borderless farms took up a lot of room, and they firmly believed in the superiority of white Christians to indigenous people. Most black and Indian communities in South Africa hoped that if the British defeated the Boers, they would be afforded more political, educational, and commercial opportunities. Gandhi even encouraged the Indian community to support Britain in order to achieve freedom. However, many black Africans also served on the side of the Boers as employees of the farmers, and they served as wagon drivers, servants, or farm workers to families whose men were at war. Black African families also suffered due to the scorched earth policies of the British. They too were displaced and ended up in the concentration camps, which the white Afrikaans establishment had historically tried to ignore in order to maintain an image of Boer martyrdom. There were separate camps for white and black displaced families. Emily Hobhouse never bothered to visit a black camp, although she asserted that somebody should. The death tolls of women and children in the black camps were never recorded, and the victims, who likely died in the thousands, were never memorialized. Number 8. It was Canada's first major military expedition abroad. The fight was not just between British soldiers and the Boer guerrilla forces. Canada's involvement signaled the first time Canadian troops would fight on another continent. The first Canadian contingent arrived late in 1899. and they first fought at the Battle of Paardeberg in February 1900. The battle was the bloodiest single day of fighting for the Canadians in the conflict, with 60 Canadians wounded on the first day and a further 18 killed in combat. Of the 7,000 Canadians who volunteered for service in the South African War, around 280 died of injury or illness, and an additional 250 were wounded. Number 9. White and Indigenous Australians and New Zealanders fought for the British. As British colonies, Australia and New Zealand provided troops for the Boer War. As there were already some Australians in South Africa, they signed up when the war broke out, but recruitment also took place in Australia. The Australian troops were usually mounted, but issues did arise through poor training and ill-prepared recruits. Roughly 16,000 Australians, including around 70 Indigenous Australians, and 6,500 New Zealanders fought in the South African War. Number 10. Winston Churchill made a name for himself as a war hero. The ambitious young Winston Churchill was in his mid-20s in 1899 when he traveled to South Africa as a newspaper correspondent for the Morning Post. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Rudyard Kipling were famous figures conducting similar work. However, Churchill's grasp of the history behind the Boer War gave him an advantage over the other writers, and his pieces were often insightful and accessible. Typical for a young man in his 20s, Churchill arrived in Cape Town armed with a vast liquor cabinet that included 18 bottles of Scotch whiskey. His escapades in South Africa sound like they're directly from an action movie. After being in South Africa for a few weeks, an armored train he was on was ambushed. Far from being a defenseless reporter, Churchill helped direct the soldiers to free the train, allowing some to flee to safety. Churchill was among the number who were captured and held as a prisoner of war. Yet Churchill did not agonize over his fate. His biggest concern was that I had only cut myself out of the whole of this exciting war with all its boundless possibilities of adventure and advancement. In December 1899, armed with only 4 slabs of melting chocolate and a crumbling biscuit, Churchill scaled the fence of the prison camp. He embarked on a seemingly impossible 300-mile journey through enemy territory to safety. The writer had become the story, and England was gripped by the saga of the Boers' manhunt and Churchill's ability to evade capture. Churchill traveled at night, stealing food and drinking from streams until he could no longer go on. He knew he had to take a chance and seek aid. Churchill knocked at the door of a coal mine manager, not knowing if it would be answered by friend or foe. As luck would have it, the coal mine manager was an Englishman who hid Churchill in the coal mine until he could be smuggled onto a freight train that carried him to freedom. The fame and heroism he gained in South Africa won him favor and launched his political career. The day after he was elected to Parliament, he wrote, "Nothing but personal popularity arising out of the late South African War carried me in." How would you like to get a deeper understanding of history, impress your friends, and predict the future more accurately based on past events? If this sounds like something you might be into, then check out the brand new Captivating History Book Club by clicking the first link in the description. To learn more about the Boer War, check out our book, The Boer War, a captivating guide to its causes, battles, and legacy in South Africa. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. If you found the video captivating, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.